I remember the exact moment when I realized my children had stopped seeing me as their father and started seeing me as a balance sheet. It was my 75th birthday, a Sunday morning that started with the smell of coffee and ended with the taste of betrayal. "Happy birthday, Dad!" My daughter Lisa's voice was bright as she handed me a black folder with a bow. "It's a symbolic gift to make things easier for everyone." Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. I had no idea what was coming. My weathered hands that had crafted furniture for nearly 5 decades, trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Inside was a legal document titled Voluntary Donation Agreement with Lifetime Usufruct. I may have been 75, but my mind was sharp enough to understand what I was looking at. My 3 children wanted me to sign away everything I owned while I was still alive. My name is David Harris. I'm a widower, a father of 3, and a retired carpenter who just wanted a simple birthday celebration. What I got instead was a masterclass in disappointment and an opportunity to teach the final lesson my children never expected to learn. Growing up poor in the outskirts of Milwaukee shaped everything about me. My father worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. I swore my kids would never know that kind of struggle. I married Margaret when we were both 22, young and full of dreams, but with empty pockets. We rented a tiny apartment above a hardware store, which turned out to be fortunate. The owner, Mr. Jenkins, taught me woodworking when I helped around the shop on weekends. "You've got good hands," he told me. "Steady, patient. Wood responds to patience." Those words became the foundation of my life's work. When Margaret got pregnant with Charles, our firstborn, I was already taking small carpentry jobs on the side. By the time Anthony came along 2 years later, I had my own small business. Lisa arrived 3 years after that, completing our family. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Every extra dollar went into savings or toward the modest house we eventually bought. Margaret managed our finances with meticulous care, tracking every penny in a leather-bound ledger she kept in our bedroom drawer. "We're building something that will last," she would say, smiling at our children playing in the yard. "Something they can build upon." When cancer took Margaret 12 years ago, something fundamental changed in our family dynamic. The children were all adults by then, Charles working in finance, Anthony in insurance, and Lisa as a teacher. They offered help, of course, but I was determined to maintain my independence. Perhaps that was my first mistake. "Dad, you should sell the house," Charles suggested barely a month after the funeral. "It's too much for you to manage alone." "I can manage just fine," I told him, perhaps more sharply than necessary. Grief makes us defensive sometimes. I continued working well past retirement age, partly because I loved creating with my hands, but mostly because I wanted to leave something substantial for my children. I purchased a small plot of land outside the city, nothing fancy, but it would appreciate in value over time. I maintained the house where they'd grown up. I lived frugally, saving for their future. As my health began to decline, their visits became more frequent and more focused on my arrangements. "Have you updated your will, Dad?" Anthony would ask casually over Sunday dinner. "Are your finances in order?" Lisa would inquire while helping with the dishes. I always answered truthfully. Yes, everything was in order. Yes, they were my beneficiaries. Yes, they would inherit everything when I was gone, but apparently when I was gone wasn't soon enough. Which brings me back to that Sunday morning, my 75th birthday, and the black folder that changed everything. I looked up from the document to see my 3 children watching me intently. Charles sat directly across from me, his expression professionally neutral, the same look he gave his investment clients. Anthony fidgeted with his watch, avoiding my eyes. Lisa leaned forward, her smile encouraging but strained. "It's a simple transfer of assets," Charles explained, his voice smooth as polished mahogany. "You'll still live here, of course. Nothing changes day to day. This just simplifies things. Legally speaking, Simplifies things, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Exactly, Anthony chimed in. No probate court, no inheritance taxes, no complications. Lisa reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. It's really the most sensible solution, Dad. We've all discussed it. You've all discussed it, I said quietly. Without me. An uncomfortable silence settled over the kitchen table, the same table I had crafted by hand when we first moved into this house. I ran my fingers over a small notch on the edge, remembering how Anthony had accidentally dropped a toy truck on it when he was 7. So many memories in this wood. It's not like that, Charles said, his confidence wavering slightly. We just wanted to have everything prepared. Of course, I nodded, carefully folding the document and placing it back in the folder. And you prepared this for my birthday. Lisa shifted in her seat. You thought it would be a nice gift to ask me to sign away everything I've worked for my entire life. My voice remained calm, which seemed to unsettle them more than if I'd shouted. Dad, please, Anthony started, but I raised my hand. No, I understand perfectly. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting as they always did these days. Let me get you something in return. I walked to my bedroom, feeling their eyes on my back. My hands should have been shaking with anger, but strangely I felt a profound calm. In my closet, behind a stack of winter sweaters, was a small fireproof safe. I dialed the combination, Margaret's birthday, and removed 3 sealed envelopes I'd prepared just days before. Call it intuition, call it preparation, call it a father finally seeing his children clearly. When I returned to the kitchen, they were whispering urgently among themselves. They fell silent as I placed an envelope in front of each of them. Open them, I said, lowering myself back into my chair. Charles opened his first, always the leader. His face remained impassive for a moment before his eyes widened in disbelief. This is a joke, he said flatly. Anthony tore his envelope open next, scanning the contents with increasing agitation. Dad, you can't be serious. Lisa was last, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the paper. When she looked up, her eyes were filled with tears. Daddy, please. It's not a joke, I said calmly. It's my will, properly executed and filed with my attorney 3 days ago. The document they each held was identical, a notification that I had revised my will to leave 90% of my assets to a community foundation providing technical education to underprivileged youth. The remaining 10% would go to the public hospital that had cared for Margaret during her final days. My children would receive nothing. But why? Lisa's voice cracked. I looked at each of them in turn, these strangers who carried my blood but had somehow lost everything I'd tried to teach them about dignity and respect. Because you've already received your inheritance, I said quietly. Years of sacrifice, opportunities I never had, education, support, love. And today you showed me exactly what those gifts meant to you. I tapped the black folder containing their prepared document. This isn't what family does. This isn't love or concern. This is calculation. Charles recovered first, his financial mind quickly assessing the situation. This won't stand up in court. We can contest it on grounds of mental competency. I smiled sadly. You can try. My attorney has thoroughly documented my mental state, and there's a special clause. Any legal challenge automatically triggers the donation of the remaining 10% to the foundation as well. You get nothing either way. You would leave everything to strangers instead of your own children. Anthony's voice rose in indignation. Not strangers, I corrected him. Young people who value education and hard work. People who remind me of myself at their age, determined to build something meaningful. Lisa was crying openly now. Dad, we were just trying to help, to protect your assets. From what? From me? I shook my head. No, you were trying to secure what you see as your entitlement. But here's the truth. Children aren't entitled to their parents' possessions. What you're entitled to is the love, guidance, and opportunities I've already given you. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, birds continued singing. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower rumbled to life. The world continued turning while my family fractured beyond repair. Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold. "We'll talk when you're thinking more clearly." Anthony followed, already pulling out his phone, presumably to call a lawyer friend. Lisa lingered, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, please don't do this. We love you." I looked at my daughter, my youngest, who had once sat on my lap while I read her bedtime stories. "If this is love, Lisa, then I've failed completely as a father." She left without another word, the door closing softly behind her. I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of a birthday celebration that had turned into something else entirely. On the counter, a store-bought cake waited with unlit candles. 75 years, and this was where we had ended up. The next day, my phone exploded with calls and messages. My children had apparently shared their version of events with extended family and friends. I was being portrayed as confused, vindictive, possibly suffering from early dementia. Their narrative painted them as concerned children trying to protect a stubborn father from himself. What they didn't expect was for my story to emerge as well. The director of the community foundation called me directly after receiving notification of my planned bequest. When I explained the circumstances, she was moved to tears. "Mr. Harris, would you mind if we shared your story? Not for publicity, but because it speaks to something important about dignity and purpose." I agreed, not out of spite, but because I believed there was a lesson here that extended beyond my family's personal drama. The foundation posted a simple statement on their social media accounts. "Today we learned of an extraordinary gift from a local craftsman who chose to invest in future generations rather than reward the entitlement of the present. We are humbled and inspired by his choice to transform pain into possibility." The post went viral, as young people say. Local newspapers picked up the story. A radio station called for an interview. By the end of the week, I had become an unlikely symbol of something that resonated deeply with people, the right to determine one's own legacy. The reactions were mixed, of course. Some criticized me for being harsh. Others applauded my stand against what they saw as elder financial abuse. But most simply seemed to appreciate the fundamental question at the heart of it all. What do we owe our children, and what do they owe us in return? Charles lost a client when the story broke, someone who recognized him from the article and withdrew their investments. Anthony's insurance firm placed him on temporary leave, concerned about the negative publicity. Lisa faced uncomfortable questions at her church group, where she had always portrayed herself as the devoted daughter caring for her aging father. They were experiencing, perhaps for the first time, the natural consequences of their actions. 3 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. Lisa stood on my doorstep, alone, and without the confident demeanor she had shown on my birthday. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated but stepped aside to let her enter. The house was different now. I had donated most of the furniture I didn't need and converted Margaret's sewing room into a small workshop where I created miniature wooden toys for the children at the local hospital. "You've changed things," she observed, looking around. "Yes," I replied simply. She sat on the couch, one of the few original pieces I had kept. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Dad." I waited, giving her the space to continue. "What we did was wrong," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Not just the document, but everything leading up to it. The way we talked about your assets as if they were already ours. The way we made plans without consulting you." She looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so ashamed." I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward it. "Why are you here, Lisa?" "Not to ask you to change your will," she said quickly. "That's your decision, and I respect it now. I'm here because—" She took a deep breath. "Because I miss my father. And because I want to be the kind of person who deserves to be your daughter, even if I never see a penny of inheritance." It was the first honest thing any of my children had said to me in years. "The foundation called me," I told her. "They're naming the carpentry training room after me. They want me to teach some basic woodworking classes to the students." A small smile formed on Lisa's lips. "You'd be a wonderful teacher." "I thought so too," I nodded. "I start next week." We talked for over an hour, really talked without the undercurrent of financial expectation that had poisoned our relationship. She told me about her marriage struggles, about her doubts regarding her career choice, about the pressure she felt from her brothers to present a united front against me. "They're still planning to contest the will," she admitted, "but I won't be part of it anymore." When she left, something had changed between us. Not healing, that would take much longer, but perhaps the recognition that relationships built on genuine care were the only inheritance worth fighting for. Over the next year, I found a new purpose at the foundation. Working with young people eager to learn a trade reminded me of my own early days, struggling to master the patience wood demands. I donated tools from my workshop, designed a curriculum based on my decades of experience, and watched with pride as students created their first pieces. Charles and Anthony followed through with their legal challenge, as expected. It was dismissed quickly, triggering the clause that directed the remaining 10% to the foundation as well. They stopped calling after that. Lisa, however, began to visit regularly, sometimes bringing homemade meals, other times just sitting with me in comfortable silence while I worked on a project. Slowly, tentatively, we rebuilt something that resembled a father-daughter relationship. On my 76th birthday, she arrived with a small wrapped package. "It's not a legal document," she joked nervously. Inside was a hand-carved wooden frame containing a photograph of her and me from decades earlier. I was teaching her to sand a small jewelry box in my workshop, her tiny hands covered by mine as we moved the sandpaper in careful strokes. "I found it in my old albums," she explained. "I thought maybe you could put it in your classroom at the foundation to remind the students that craftsmanship is something passed down, not just taught." I felt tears forming in my eyes, the first I had allowed myself since that fateful birthday a year before. "I'd like that very much," I told her. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what we leave behind when we die, but what we teach while we're alive. My children had always focused on the former, missing the true wealth I had tried to share all along: dignity, integrity, and the satisfaction of creating something meaningful with your own two hands. In the end, I didn't disinherit my children to punish them. I did it to free them and myself from the poisonous expectation that had corrupted our relationship. Some might call it cruel. I call it the final necessary lesson from a father who refused to be reduced to a balance sheet. The greatest gift I received on my 75th birthday wasn't wrapped in paper or presented in a folder. It was the painful clarity that allowed me to reclaim my life, my purpose, and ultimately my dignity. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the inheritance in the world. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced family conflicts over inheritance? How did you handle it? To hear the next story in our series, just click on the box appearing on your screen. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity.